It began with the most routine of moments. A night spent at a family member's home. The familiar sounds of a Berlin morning. A closed door. For 15-year-old Rebecca Reusch, February 18, 2019, was a day that held all the ordinary promises of a Monday. School, friends, the gentle rhythm of a life just beginning to take shape. The hours the night before were filled with the easy comfort of a sleepover. A space that should have been a sanctuary. But on this morning, the routine would be fractured. The predictable sequence of events, the walk to school, the messages to friends, the return home would never come to pass. The simple closure of a door would mark a dividing line, separating a life full of future from a void of unanswered questions. In the hours that followed, as the city woke up around her, Rebecca's world went quiet. Her voice vanished from conversations. Her presence disappeared from the places it should have been. The only thing left behind was a growing, deafening silence and the chilling evidence of a morning that started like any other, but ended like no other. This is the story of that morning. A story of the last moments that can be accounted for, the last person who saw her, and the relentless search for answers in the space where a young girl simply vanished. This is the story of Rebecca Reusch. Her case is a labyrinth of dead ends and silent truths. At Dark Atlas International, we navigate the world's most haunting mysteries. If you're ready to explore the maps of the missing and the forgotten, subscribe and join our journey into the heart of the unknown. To understand the profound disruption of that day, one must first understand the life that was so suddenly interrupted. Rebecca Reusch was, in many ways, the heart of her world. A bright-eyed 15-year-old, she navigated the universal landscape of teenage life, schoolwork, social circles, and the quiet discovery of who she might become. Described by those who knew her as a kind and cheerful presence, she was deeply woven into the fabric of a close-knit family. Her world was one of routine and connection, a life built on a foundation of predictable love and security. Central to this family circle was Rebecca's older sister. The two shared a bond forged in childhood, a connection that had only matured with time. The sister had built a life of her own, creating a new family unit with her husband, Florian. To Rebecca, this couple represented an extension of home. They were a familiar, stable presence. Florian was not a distant relative but her brother-in-law, a man integrated into family gatherings, a figure who existed firmly within the trusted inner circle. His home was not an unfamiliar place. It was a second home, a place of comfort and reliability. And so, on February 17th, the decision for Rebecca to stay over at her sister's apartment was not an extraordinary event. It was a simple, domestic arrangement. She arrived that evening, carrying her backpack into a space that held no secrets, no undercurrent of unease. The evening unfolded with the gentle rhythm of any family night. Shared meals, conversation, the quiet hum of a television in the background. It was an environment that represented the absolute antithesis of danger, a place where a young girl could feel perfectly safe, surrounded by those who cared for her most. Every detail of that evening pointed towards a single, unremarkable conclusion. A normal night in a normal home. This very sense of safety, this unquestioned trust placed in family and home, would soon become the core of a devastating enigma. It is a question that would haunt investigators and loved ones alike, a question that echoes through every detail of this case. How does a person simply disappear from a place they know, from the very people they love? How does silence fall so completely within the heart of a family? The morning of Monday, February 18th, began with a testimony that would become the fixed point in this entire mystery, the official account of the last person to see Rebecca. According to her brother-in-law, Florian, the morning was one of routine. He awoke. He saw his young sister-in-law in her bed, apparently awake and looking at her phone. It was a brief, unremarkable observation, a snapshot of modern life. He then prepared for his day and left the apartment for work, closing the door behind him around 7:30. In his telling, it was a morning like any other. But as the day progressed, the routine began to unravel. Rebecca did not arrive at school. She was not answering her phone, a device that was typically an extension of her own hand. The easy check-in calls from her mother became calls of mounting concern, then calls of pure alarm. When her family rushed to the apartment to check on her, they made a discovery that made no sense. Her most essential belongings, her phone, her wallet, her keys were all there. They were sitting in the apartment, as if she had simply stepped out for a moment. Yet, her backpack and a jacket were gone. The scene presented a conflicting narrative, a puzzle with pieces that refused to fit together. In that moment, standing in an apartment that was supposed to be a place of safety, her family was confronted with two terrifying possibilities, each one leading down a profoundly different path. The first was that Rebecca, for reasons unknown, had chosen to run away, yet had deliberately left behind the very things she would need to survive on her own. The second possibility was that the scene they were looking at was not a reflection of her choices at all, but a carefully arranged set of clues, a stage set to point them in the wrong direction. The decision was made. The police were called. And with that call, a simple family worry escalated into a full-blown investigation, centered on a single haunting question that would define everything to come. What truly happened in the space between that closed door and that first missed call? The response was immediate and methodical. The Berlin police descended upon the apartment and its surroundings, treating the location with a new, sobering seriousness. The initial search was a physical one, scouring every corner, every potential hiding place in the immediate area. Public appeals were launched, her face soon plastered across news broadcasts and social media, a plea for anyone with information to come forward. For the family, these first hours were a torturous blend of hope and fear, clinging to the possibility that she was nearby, simply lost or confused. But while the physical search yielded little, the digital investigation was just beginning. Forensic technicians began analyzing Rebecca's phone, a device that had been left behind. And it was here that the first major crack appeared in the official timeline. Data extracted from the device indicated activity that occurred well after Florian had stated he left for work. The phone had not simply lain dormant. It had been used. This was the first definitive piece of evidence that something was profoundly wrong. The timeline provided by the last person to see her no longer matched the digital footprint left behind. The nature of this activity was perhaps the most chilling detail. Someone had accessed Rebecca's Instagram account. This single action struck a devastating blow to the runaway theory. A teenage girl who has chosen to disappear does not leave her wallet and keys, only to then log into her social media, the very platform that would betray her location and state of mind. This was not the behavior of someone trying to vanish. This was the behavior of someone else, someone who was in possession of her device, someone who was, for reasons unknown, interacting with her digital identity after she was last seen. This digital ghost, this post-disappearance phone activity, forced a seismic shift in the entire investigation. For the Reusch family, the last flickers of hope that Rebecca had simply run away were extinguished, replaced by the cold, hard dread of criminal intent. For the police, the case was now something else entirely. Their focus narrowed, their methods intensified. The search for a missing girl was now also a hunt for the person who had, with a few taps on a screen, revealed their own presence in the aftermath of her vanishing. With the digital evidence shattering the initial timeline, the investigation turned its full attention to the man who had provided it, the brother-in-law, Florian. His alibi was now the subject of intense scrutiny. Every minute of his claimed morning routine was picked apart, cross-referenced against digital footprints and potential witnesses. The timeline was everything. As detectives reconstructed those critical hours, small inconsistencies began to surface. Minor contradictions in his story that, when placed against the digital evidence, took on a new and heavy significance. The investigation then received two critical breaks. The first was the discovery of Florian's white van on traffic camera footage. This allowed investigators to partially chart his movements that morning, creating a physical map to compare against his statement. The second, and more dramatic, development was a tip, a specific location provided to the police. This tip, which media reports would later suggest was connected to Florian, led them across the border into Poland, to a vast, dense forest. Suddenly, the search for Rebecca was no longer confined to a Berlin apartment block, but had expanded into a sprawling, remote wilderness. One can only imagine the internal landscape of a person in that situation. Sitting in a stark interrogation room, faced with relentless questions about the disappearance of a young girl you called family. Was it the frantic pulse of someone caught in a lie, mentally tracing every step, searching for a misstatement? Or was it the resolute, weary calm of an innocent man, a man trapped by a terrible coincidence, watching his life and his family unravel based on circumstances he could not control? The truth of what happened in that room remains known only to him and the investigators who sat across that table. For the Berlin police, the pieces were falling into a pattern they found compelling. They had a suspect with exclusive opportunity. They had a timeline that contained contradictions. They had a vehicle whose movements they could trace, and a tip that pointed to a specific remote location. They believed they had their man. And so, they moved to make an arrest, convinced that the evidence they had gathered would be enough to uncover the whole truth. But they were poised to confront the monumental challenge that has defined this case from its very beginning. They had a suspect, but they had no victim. They were about to enter a legal battle where the most important piece of evidence, Rebecca Reusch herself, was missing. The arrest of Florian R. sent seismic shocks through the family. For the parents, it was a devastating confirmation of their deepest fears. Yet it created an impossible chasm. The man accused of causing their daughter's disappearance was the husband of their other daughter. The family home was now a house divided, torn between grief for Rebecca and the staggering allegation now leveled against a man they had once welcomed as family. The sister faced an unbearable choice, standing at the center of a storm that threatened to obliterate her entire world. Throughout the legal process, Florian R. maintained an unwavering position. He was innocent. He offered no confession, no alternate theory, no dramatic breakdown. From his perspective, he was a man ensnared by tragedy and coincidence, his life dismantled by a chain of circumstantial events. For the investigators, this steadfast denial was a wall. Without a confession, the case became a complex psychological standoff, a battle between the state's narrative of guilt and the suspect's simple, repeated assertion of innocence. The question hung in the air. Was this the calm of a man with nothing to hide, or the calculated defense of someone who knew the system's weaknesses? The prosecution's challenge was laid bare for the court. They could present a compelling sequence of events. They could point to the strange phone activity, the inconsistencies in his schedule, the tip about the Polish forest. But what they could not present was a single piece of direct, incontrovertible proof. There was no murder weapon. No forensic evidence like blood or DNA linking him directly to a violent act. No eyewitness to any crime. The entire case was built on a foundation of circumstances, and at its center was a void, the profound and absolute absence of Rebecca Reusch herself. In a murder trial, the victim's body is not just evidence. It is the cornerstone of the entire proceeding. The German legal system is built upon a fundamental principle: proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Without a body, doubt is not just a possibility. It is a pervasive presence. Doubt about what truly happened. Doubt about the cause of death. Doubt about whether a death even occurred. The circumstantial evidence, however suspicious, piled up on one side of the scale. But on the other side, the absence of Rebecca's body created a counterweight of such immense size that the scale could not tip. The chasm of that single missing piece was one the prosecution's case could not cross. Driven by a specific tip, the investigation crossed an international border, focusing its full force on a sprawling, remote forest in Poland. It became one of the largest and most intensive searches in the region's recent history. For days, the quiet woods were filled with the sounds of snapping branches, shouted commands, and the barking of search dogs. The world watched as every inch of that rugged terrain was scoured, the collective hope and dread of an entire nation projected onto this lonely patch of wilderness. This was no longer just a search. It was a potential endgame. For the Reusch family, these days were a unique form of torture. There was the horrific hope that they would find something, a hope intertwined with the terror of what that something would be. Every phone ring held the potential to either end their nightmare or deepen it forever. They were suspended in a state of unbearable anticipation, their emotions tethered to the movements of strangers in a distant forest. They waited for a call that would bring closure, whatever form that closure might take. But the forest gave up no secrets. No item of clothing, no piece of evidence, no sign of Rebecca was ever found. The massive operation, built on a specific tip and the full force of investigative hope, yielded nothing but more questions. The trail, once again, had gone cold. Rebecca was still out there somewhere. And with the failure of this critical lead, the legal foundation for holding their prime suspect was crumbling. The one man who might hold the key to the entire mystery was about to walk out of a prison cell and back into the world. A free man. Florian R. was released from custody, a decision made not on the grounds of proven innocence, but on the lack of evidence to legally justify his continued detention. In the eyes of the law, he was a free man. But in the eyes of the public and the relentless media spotlight, he was forever branded. He had transitioned from a family member to a prime suspect, and now to a perpetual person of interest, a man living under a cloud of collective suspicion from which there may never be an escape. His freedom was, in many ways, a new kind of prison. For Rebecca's parents, his release was a devastating blow. It felt like a door to justice and answers had been slammed shut. Their grief was now compounded by a profound and frustrating void. A legal system that could not provide the resolution they so desperately needed. For the older sister, the situation was impossibly bifurcated. She stood in a no-man's land, her life irrevocably fractured. On one side was the ghost of a sister she adored, who had vanished from her own home. On the other was a husband, the man she had built a life with, now returned to that home under the weight of an unimaginable accusation. The family unit had been shattered, its trust replaced by an unspoken, agonizing question mark. One can only imagine the landscape of that home after his return. The conversations that were not had. The questions that hung in the air during the quietest moments. The space between them was no longer just physical. It was a chasm filled with the echo of a missing girl. Every glance, every silence, was filtered through the one unchangeable fact. He was the last person to see Rebecca alive, and now, he was the only person who knew the full truth of what happened in those morning hours. A truth that remained locked away. His release sparked a fierce public debate. Was it a failure of the justice system, unable to hold a man who many believed was guilty? Or was it the system working as intended, refusing to convict based on suspicion alone, upholding the principle that it is better for a guilty man to go free than for an innocent one to be imprisoned? There was no consensus. But for the family at the heart of this storm, the philosophical debate was a hollow echo. Their reality was a life sentence of not knowing, a limbo with no end in sight. At its core, this case is defined by a void, a critical gap in time that holds all the answers. What truly transpired inside that apartment after the brother-in-law claimed he left for work? The official timeline provides a framework, but the digital ghost in the machine, the post-departure phone activity, tells a different, more disturbing story. So, who was really using Rebecca's phone? Was it a panicked attempt to create an alibi, to make it seem as if she were still alive and well? And the most agonizing question of all, a question that haunts every missing persons case. Where is Rebecca Reusch? Without a location, there can be no crime scene analysis, no definitive cause of death, no closure. Even the physical clues left behind are open to conflicting interpretations. The missing backpack and jacket initially suggested a teenager who had left of her own volition. But in the context of a potential crime, their meaning shifts dramatically. Were these items taken to stage a disappearance, to lead investigators to believe Rebecca had simply walked away? Or were they removed because they contained evidence, something that could not be left behind? These items are not just clues. They are a Rorschach test. What they mean depends entirely on the story you believe unfolded in that apartment. From a legal and investigative standpoint, this case exemplifies the no-body homicide dilemma. A prosecutor can build a compelling narrative of guilt based on opportunity, inconsistent statements, and suspicious behavior. They can present a powerful circumstantial case. But without a body, they cannot prove the fundamental element of the crime itself, that a murder even occurred. There is no forensic evidence from a victim, no cause of death, no opportunity to link a suspect to a specific violent act. This creates a shield of reasonable doubt so large that it becomes, in practice, insurmountable. The case remains officially open, but it is stalled, trapped in a state of legal purgatory, waiting for a breakthrough that may never come. And so, the questions linger, echoing in the silence. They are asked by her family every single day. They are studied by investigators who have not given up. They are debated by a public captivated by the mystery. But as long as those questions remain unanswered, the story of Rebecca Reusch remains a painful, open wound, and a haunting reminder of a truth that vanished without a trace. This story, at its heart, is about the shattering of fundamental human certainties. It is about the trust we place in family, and how that trust can become the very weapon that destroys a world. It is about the safety we assume within our own homes, and how quickly that safety can evaporate. For the Reusch family, these are not abstract concepts. They are the daily reality of a life forever defined by before and after. They move through the world, but a part of them remains frozen in that February morning, trapped in a nightmare that offers no waking moment, no conclusion. Their pain is a dual burden. They carry the immense crushing weight of Rebecca's absence, the silence in her room, the birthday that passes without celebration, the future that was stolen. But they also carry the exhausting weight of a justice system that, in their eyes, has failed them. They are caught in a relentless cycle of hope and despair, where every new tip leads to a dead end, and every anniversary serves as a reminder that the person they hold responsible remains just beyond the reach of the law. For the Reusch family, there is no closure, only a void. They live with two unbearable parallel truths. Their vibrant, beloved Rebecca is gone, and the man they believe is responsible walks free, protected not by innocence, but by the strict, unyielding demands of a legal system that requires proof. A system that, in this case, was rendered powerless by two of the most devastating words in any investigation. No body. And in that void, their search for answers continues, a quiet, determined flame that refuses to be extinguished. This case forces us to confront difficult questions that have no easy answers. Can a court truly deliver justice when the most critical piece of evidence is forever missing? Does the release of a prime suspect, based on a lack of proof, represent the legal system working as intended to protect the innocent, or does it represent a profound moral failure for the family left behind? And perhaps the most personal question of all, if you were in their place, living with this agonizing uncertainty, where would you possibly find the strength to seek peace? The disappearance of Rebecca Reusch stands as a solemn reminder of the limits of our justice system and our own understanding. It is a case built not on what was found, but on what remains absent. Yet, it is also a powerful testament to the enduring force of a family's love, a love that refuses to fade. A demand for answers that will not be silenced by time or legal technicalities. It is a love that persists in the face of the unimaginable, a lasting echo in the overwhelming silence. A reminder of a life, full of promise, and a mystery, full of pain. The Berlin police continue to investigate the disappearance of Rebecca Reusch. If you have any information, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem, please contact the authorities immediately. The source material for this report is available in the video description. The search for Rebecca Reusch continues. Her story is a stark reminder that some mysteries remain painfully and hauntingly unresolved. Thank you for watching.